I did not like carbs at all. I would avoid them pretty much all week. The only carbs I would have would be, some bread on the weekend, and that was a bit of a treat. So yeah, I was probably eating 1400 or 1200 to 1400 during the week. And then on the weekends, once I actually went back and, worked out what I was eating, it was probably a lot higher. So that, F45 I'd been doing for 3 years, and that was on the background of doing, when I was in uni, the lemon detox diet, and I'd done, a Weight Watchers program for a few months. So I felt like I had tried everything, and I just did not know, what I needed to do. So Holly at that point was doing a couple of training sessions. So I did 2 personal training sessions a week, and started with the meal plan. And initially, I remember seeing my meal plan and thinking, there is no way I'm going to eat all that. She's trying to put on another 10 kilos. Because, I had a paddle pop and I had a muesli bar and all of the foods that we've been told, oh, there's too much sugar in paddle pops and muesli bars, they're not good for you. And you can't have yogurt that's flavored. You can only have Greek yogurt. So all of the things that we'd been, brainwashed in thinking are healthy, were on my meal plan. And I remember just picking and choosing bits and pieces of what was listed on the meal plan to eat. I think I was, having the main meals, but none of the snacks in between. And then probably, a month or so in, I was like, we're paying quite a bit for it. I need to trust the science. What I've been doing hasn't been working. So I need to give it, go all in. And I think within a month I'd started to, lose a kilo, and I thought, oh, okay, great. I can, keep eating a bit more. And then I clarified with Holly and said, am I actually meant to eat every single thing on this plan? And she was like, yes, eat it all. So then I went to town. I just, had my ice cream every night and had everything. And I kept losing a bit of weight. And I, at that point, was only training 2 days a week, as opposed to my, 6 mornings at 5 a.m. at F45. And I started to actually enjoy the sessions, because you're not being, smashed all the time with just cardio and, fast weights. It's like resistance and weights where you are slow and calculated, and you're going up each time. So you're seeing the progress every week, as opposed to just doing the same cardio and the same cardio. So um, I started seeing results kind of from that. And, I had a friend's wedding in November. I think I joined in about June. And so my goal was to, lose 5 kilos before the end of the year. Holly kind of said from the start, we're not going to continue this diet over Christmas. We're going to make sure we're back up to a good amount of calories. But we did, I think we got down to 1,300 calories or 1,400,
Yeah.
over a course of, I probably was on the nutrition plan for 3 months before we went into a deficit. I wasn't at the start tracking, I wasn't eating my meal plan. So it wasn't until I could be trusted that I was eating everything on my meal plan, and I was able to track prior to starting a deficit. So by doing that, once I actually started the deficit, it actually meant that I understood what I was eating. I was able to track, my carbs. I knew how much protein I needed, so that if we did have a meal out, or if, I went to Melbourne for a long weekend during one of my deficits, and it was such a good test, because we did go out to dinner, but, I was able to look at the menu, think, okay, well, that's the carb option, that's my protein option, and my fats I've had more for breakfast, so that's fine. And it's those kind of weekends away, I said to some of my clients, are the really good testers, because this program is not meant to last a lifetime. It's, meant to train you, teach you, and help keep you accountable. So, I felt like that little snippet of a few days was a really good training session to see how I would go without the really strict diet plan. So yeah, did the long weekend away. And once I dropped probably about 7 kilos, I think from November to maybe October, sorry, from
Mm.
June to about November, we then started a reverse diet. So from about 1,400 calories back up to around 2,000. That was very terrifying when I was told I'm going to be going back up, because you just seen so much progress. And I thought, I don't want to waste it. When you get in the mindset of a calorie deficit, it is so much easier to stick to, because that's all you can eat. You don't, after a few days, like, you're hungry for the first few days, but then, the further you get into the deficit, the more you just adapt and your body gets used to it. And you weigh yourself, you see, the positive number. Oh, yeah, that's great. It's lower. And so it's that mindset of, oh, this is working. Fantastic. I'll keep it up. And, to be then told I'm going to put it up by another 100 calories, another 100 calories after just coming down past that, is a real mindset. You've got to re-strategize your mindset as to, okay, this is actually not going to change. I'm not going to put on the 5-7 kilos back. So yeah, we slowly worked our way back up to around the 2,000 calories. And then for 3 months over Christmas, New Year, in January, when I had a holiday planned, We just kind of did a maintenance phase, which the goal was to put on max kind of 1 to 2 kilos in that time. So I think I put on maybe 1.5 kilos, and that was trying to just, eat relatively well, but also not focus on tracking. So I didn't do, for that period, we weren't really tracking. It was more just knowing about how much to eat. Don't eat until you're stuffed. Make sure you're having enough protein throughout all of those meals. So we then did, a deficit. And again, it wasn't until I was back in the mindset, because you kind of get out of the mindset of, I've got to track, I've got to do all this. I've got to be very strict with my proteins, carbs, and fat. So it wasn't until I could, be strict again for another couple of weeks for tracking before we started the second deficit. So in April, I got engaged. And so it was even more of a, reason to want to go back into a deficit. I think I started, so in October when I had finished with F45, I was 75 kilos. And then I lost a couple, probably 2 or 3 kilos before I started with Holly. And then, so yeah, I was 72. And when I got to about 65, that's when we did the reverse diet back up to about, and I got to, I think, 67 kilos.
Yeah.
We maintained that for the 3-month period. And then we did another deficit. However, the deficit, because it had started from much higher than it was before, the lowest I ever got in the second deficit was 1750 calories. That was my lowest for the second period. So we then did, still continually only train twice a week with the occasional 5 to 10K jog on a weekend, and did from April to kind of September, another deficit down to 1700. And I think the reason it worked really well for me is I really enjoyed the foods I was eating. Like, my breakfast was things that I love. Like, I had English muffins for breakfast with eggs and then ham and avocado. So I wasn't hungry because I felt like I was still getting a good amount of food. I had ample snacks. My main meals were big enough, so I wasn't constantly hungry or feeling like I needed more food. So I think for me, it really made me realize that if you have foods you like that you can incorporate into your plan, it makes a big difference. So I was happy to have that for months on end because it was so easy to eat. People were like, how are you eating so much and losing weight? And so once we were at the bottom, we, probably about 2 months before the wedding, started to reverse back up. And I was, I think I probably lost maybe 8 to 10 kilos. I think I got down to about 55 before the wedding, which was down from, 72 to 75, 18 months before that. And then we obviously had to maintain for, 8 weeks before the wedding. So again, going through that mindset reshift of, we're going to put your calories back up, even though you just hit your goal weight and, your goal, now we're going to go back up. So we reverse dieted back up to about 2000 calories. And I maintained that, in the period in the lead up to the wedding. And then I was overseas for 6 weeks for our honeymoon. And I remember messaging Holly saying, oh, I think I've just put on another 10 kilos. But at the same time, we were trying, when we could, we were trying to buy some protein snacks when we were away, and some, whether that was protein drinks or yogurts or shakes as our snacks, rather than buying, a Mars bar, you buy a protein bar. And it was just a whole lot of little things to try to keep your protein up. And when you go out to dinner, yes, there's sometimes just, hamburger and chips, and that is totally fine. But there were other nights where, there was no amazing option. So you just get steak and a salad, or, with a side of potatoes. So when I got home, I was a little bit scared to jump on the scales, but the whole time, obviously I'd lost a little bit of muscle mass because I couldn't train much, which I still did sessions, occasionally when the hotels had one or on the ship. But I think I put on 1 kilo for the whole 5-week period. And that was just because we had reverse dieted back up. So my, body was tolerating about 2000 calories a day. Obviously, when you're traveling, you're doing a lot more walking than you generally would be at home. So we were kind of doing 15 to 20,000 steps most days, or half the time. And so that, combined with, having a higher baseline for food, it didn't really, impact my weight. And obviously then, I was pregnant later on, and I could not exercise at all for the 3-month period because I felt so rubbish. But as soon as I could, and second trimester, and as soon as I started feeling a lot better, I went back to the gym for 2 days a week, and again started to build that muscle again, try to get back on track. And I suppose the intuitive eating doesn't mean just go and eat whatever you want. There might be periods like when you're on holidays that you don't want to track and put everything into the app, which I didn't. But then when I got home and I started to think, okay, I just need a little bit more accountability. How much, should I be eating? What meals do I want? I would often on a Sunday just plan out what meals I wanted for the week, chucked it into the app, had a bit of a look at it. And then for the week, I knew what snacks I, was going to eat, or if I needed to swap something out, you kind of just start to gauge how much certain snacks have. Like if you're having a protein bar, they're generally about 180 calories. So certain foods just became, okay, well, I know exactly what I need to eat. So if I don't eat that, well, yep, that's about the same as that. So it kind of just became a bit more of an intuitive eating. And that's not to say, 100% of the time I'm 100% accurate. As I said, Holly, my long weekend was not ideal, but obviously the first day or the first meal that can be good should be good. So yeah, that's a bit of my story. You know,
I'm very
summarized
proud of
to
Juliet because when Juliet first started, she was the biggest carbophobe and sugarphobe ever. She was so scared that any type of sugar was like gonna make her gain weight. I would get messages all the time like, "Oh my gosh, this has like so much sugar in it," and I was like, this is the way we look at carbohydrates, whether it's 1 gram of sugar from an apple, a sweet potato, a pumpkin, or a lolly, it's always 4 calories. You can't change that unit of measurement. It is always 4 calories. What changes with that is the vitamin and mineral and fiber profile. Is an apple a better choice? Majority of the time, because it's going to fill you up for longer. Does that mean that you can't have ice cream on the odd occasion? Absolutely not. If it's going to make you more adherent to your diet, which is what it did with Jules. So Jules initially was in a state of not eating and then really badly overeating. And that's where you get this vicious like yo-yo cycle where many of you have come from, is that undereating, overeating. And that's why what happens is when you keep yo-yoing and you keep adding more fat cells, you actually can never get rid of those fat cells. So what will happen is somebody will go through a really like big strict restrictive dieting phase. They will stick to it for, I don't know, 6 to 12 months, like eating 500 calories, 1200 calories, like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. And they'll start binge eating. And when that happens is you add on a whole new bunch of fat cells. And once you add fat cells, you can never get rid of them. You can shrink them, and that's how losing body fat does happen. But once you keep adding them back, you can't get rid of them unless you do lipo, but none of us are going to do that. So that's why it's really important that we stop this yo-yo eating pattern from happening so we don't keep adding more fat cells, so we don't keep ending up in this position. So the biggest reason why we start you from a higher phase is so we don't end up back here. If we keep starting you from a lower dieting phase, you're just going to keep ending back up in this vicious cycle of undereating, overeating, undereating, overeating. You're never going to get to a state of like happy maintenance. So this is why we will never start you from low calories. Now, Jules, when it came to actually like understanding carbohydrates and sugar, what was the hardest thing for you to overcome?
just knowing that it's not going to, because I always felt quite bloated from having carbs. So I think, and it's just so ingrained and preached that, carbs are not good, carbs make you fat. So I suppose a lot of the clients who come will often come with that mentality. And a lot of my, colleagues at work have said, oh, they'll have their salad. And I'm like, where's your carbs? I say, oh, you can't have carbs, carbs are bad. And I suppose it was just that belief that carbs are not good for you. And so trying to shift that mindset of having carbs with every meal, um, was just a really big, thing. And to be honest, I had no idea what even had carbs. I thought carbs were just, your breads, your pastas, all of your complex carbs. I didn't realize that snakes and an apple, they were your carb sources as well. So I think for me, it was just a lot of learning around what actually were carbs. Why does your body need carbs? And how much better you feel when you have carbs. I again was always told by Holly that I have to have a carb prior to my workout sessions, and I would prefer to have that. I was never hungry in the morning, so I would always prefer to save my crumpet for the afternoon. And one day I remember thinking, okay, well, I'm going to have it before my workout, and that was, I think, the week that I got my 100 kilo squat record. So I thought, okay, well, I'll give this a shot. And I did my regular park run, and I had some biscuits before I did the park run, and I shaved 3 minutes off my time the week before. And that was literally by just being able to fuel your body. And I suppose it really reiterated the importance of, how your body performs better when it actually has a proper energy source fueled
And we
fueling
also
it.
set you a lot of performance goals as well. Like, especially when we were in a muscle building phase, like giving you, like, you were desperate to hit that 100 kilo squats. And I think for you, like setting a lot of performance goals along the way really reiterated, like, you needed to eat before you train so you could do that as well. Because I don't think you would have gotten there unless we definitely started giving you some carbs before you started training.
Yeah.
How long did it take you before you finally admitted that, all right, I've got to like finally eat some carbs before I start training?
Oh, a long time. Was it like 8 months, 12
It was
months?
it was a long time. It was a really long time.
Yeah, it
And
was.
when
And I suppose that was like my biggest lesson. Like when I signed up initially, I was like, yeah, I'll just do it for 3 months and then I'm done. But I suppose by the time I got to the 3 months, I was like, oh, well, I'm getting progress. I'm actually learning. I'm not comfortable doing this on my own. And so for me, like everyone, I suppose expects people at work says to me, "Oh, you lost so much weight so quickly. Why are you doing that?" And I was like, "No, it's actually been, well over 18 months. It's
yes, it
just
was a long time. It wasn't like
it's a
just a
long
quick
time."
fix.
But people only notice the last little bit. They don't often know that there's been 2 maintenance phases in between where you've, sat on the same weight, the same food for 3 months, 4 months at a time. So, yeah, it was a long time.
The maintenance phase is the most important phase because you just can't keep dieting and dieting and dieting and dieting. And initially, like with Juliet, so we did a fat loss phase. You dropped like, what was it, 6, 7 kilos?
Yeah.
And then calories did get quite low because obviously we started from a kind of a high base. And like Jules said, we didn't start the actual deficit phase until her system was there, until we stopped the under eating, overeating, till she actually understood, like, all right, cool, for me to do this properly, I have to make sure my ducks are in a row. My structure was sorted. She got a meal sorted, meals that she liked. She understood what she was eating. We undid all those bad eating patterns, and then she was mentally ready for it, because you can never start a dieting phase if you're under eating and overeating and we don't have that structure sorted. Sometimes until we get that structure sorted, yes, it will put you incidentally into a calorie deficit just because you're moving more, eating less. But the idea behind it is not to do that straight away, not to say, all right, we're going to hit the deficit hard and fast. It's like, no, you don't even know how to eat like a normal person first without restricting and then overeating. The biggest thing is get your structure sorted, build your maintenance up to as high as what we can without minimal body fat, then we diet. And you will reach a threshold. Like we said, the calories did get low. We finished at like 1,400, but then we reversed up to 2,000. So that meant the second time round, it was so much easier. But I think the biggest transition for Jules is she's had a really healthy, happy pregnancy. And that's to do with that her state of body was in maintenance, and we managed to, she could tolerate so much more food. So after the first 12 weeks, how's your pregnancy been so far?
Yeah, it's been much better than I expected. Obviously, the first trimester, I was just trying to make sure I found it really hard to get protein in. So I was just trying to eat smaller things like cheese and, have cups of milk, because the thought of eating a piece of chicken or meat, was the last thing I wanted. So, that's why I did one of those pregnancy things on little bits of food that give you high calories, because
They were
sometimes
really
foods like
helpful.
cheese, yeah, well, foods like cheese has, good amounts of protein, good amounts of fat, as well as carbs. So a few foods like that, I will try to just eat bits and pieces. Second trimester, I was able to start training again. I felt so much better. And, after having the holiday off plus, the first trimester, it actually, I really just wanted to get back into the gym, because I felt like I was, not moving, not doing anything, just, a bit of a couch potato. And that was kind of the mentality for me, to think, okay, well, now I actually can do it. I feel better. I need to get back into it. And it does get a bit scary when you haven't trained for ages and then you're straight back in, after 4 months of not training, 4 or more months of not training. But, I suppose keeping myself, like, I haven't been tracking, but by, doing a daily weight or a weekly weight, you're able to keep accountable and know how much weight we should be putting on during pregnancy per week. Second trimester is about 300 grams, and then third trimester is about half. So my, projected final weight of pregnancy is still less than my initial weight before I started the program. So for me, that was just crazy to think that, even carrying a baby full term, I would weigh less than I originally did. And, like, I can still go to the gym. I'm still
Lifting
able to
really
lift
heavy,
and
yeah.
deadlift and do squats. And I suppose because I've kept moving, I've tried to keep my food, as good as possible. As at times, obviously, I have had a lot of sugar cravings, so trying to accommodate those in my carb allowance at times. But yeah, it's been so much nicer. And a lot of people have said, oh, you're barely showing, I can't even tell, which obviously is not, to do with just the training, but I suppose by keeping healthy and keeping fit, you also feel so much better. Like we're going through renos at the moment, so I can still get in. I was using the chainsaw last weekend, chopping down trees, and it just feels so much better because my, energy levels are still high, and yeah, I was doing that.
So it's always really important to understand that you don't have to be in a state of losing weight all the time to see progress. The most progress is actually going to happen in a state of maintenance, because it's where you're going to learn to adopt your healthy habits for the long term. It's where you're going to learn to fuel your body consistently. It's also where you're going to learn to increase your food intake, because how many of you ever learned that once you finish a dieting period, that your exit strategy needs to be learning how to eat more, learning how to increase your muscle mass, and learning how to get used to living without tracking your food meticulously for the long term. It's a good skill to be able to have, but long term, you do want to be able to move away from tracking your food every single day. But like anything, it's a skill set, and a skill set that you need to learn. So the way that we coach it is maintenance first. This can be dependent for everybody, and you have to be trusted in this state. Like maintenance isn't an all in or nothing. I'm not going to be bothered at a weekend. It's like setting yourself up for a really successful dieting phase. So this can last a few months for a lot of our clients, and actually it's really good for it to last a few months, because those people usually get much better long-term results because they put in the work. They understand their habits, they understand their lifestyle, they understand training consistently, working around the kids, working around the job. And then once they've mastered that, cool, let's hit a calorie deficit for a couple of weeks. We do it differently for everyone depending on the season of life that you're in, but we like to get in, we like to get out, we like to do the work and not mess around there for too long, because nobody wants to be dieting for months on end. Like it shouldn't be drawn out for that long. Like if you're dieting any longer than like, say 8 months with diet breaks in between, then you're doing something really wrong. Like honestly, you shouldn't be continually doing a calorie deficit, calorie deficit, calorie deficit. You are not going to get anywhere. You'll get tired, burnt out, probably end up binge eating. It needs to be done strategically with diet breaks in between. And then you will reach a threshold. Once that threshold happens, we will reverse diet you back up, build up your maintenance, build up your food tolerance again. And then we can go again if that's the goal. But you cannot just keep dieting and dieting and dieting and dieting. You're not going to get anywhere. Maintenance is where you want to live for the long term. It's where the progress is going to be made, muscle is going to be built, health, habits, hormones. It's the most important phase. And I don't think a lot of you realize just how important it is, because this is where you have to learn to maintain those habits. It's the same habits that got you a fat loss result. It's going to be the same habits that get you maintaining. And that's why a lot of you will fall off the wagon. Oh, got my results now, or you've done a really restrictive challenge, or you've done a Ozempic, or you've done like a weight loss challenge, and then you actually don't learn any of the skill sets required to keep you those results. And it's really sad, because whether it's a weight loss jog or a challenge, you need that habit and routine to keep it for the long term. And it's not taught because they just want to keep you coming around and around and around. They don't want you to have the skill set to be able to do it for the long term. But that's the skill set that you need, and it's the most important part. So does anybody have any questions when it comes to maintenance? I feel like it's a topic that needs to be spoken about more often, but does anybody have any questions for both me and Juliet?
Holly?
Yes?
I've just got a question. Is it over the week, like, okay, if you're down in your carbs and then one day and then up on another, or your calories or whatever, does that matter over the week, or is it better to do it all the same, like properly each day?
Great question, Sharon. So I'm going to answer this in 2 parts. So you want to keep your protein consistent across the week, but if your carbs are under and your fats are over, theoretically, as long as by the end of the week the averages are fine, then yes, that is fine. However, on the other side of the spectrum, what a lot of people will do is restrict their food so much in the week so then they can overeat on weekends. So you've got to be in a state of, can I trust you to be able to do that? Some people I can, like you, Sharon, I definitely think that I could, because you're somebody who is really compliant with their food. I've seen no like overeating, undereating tendencies pop up. You've got to earn the trust to be able to do that, because a lot of people will be like, I'm going to bank my calories and then use them on the weekend, and then they'll starve themselves the whole week and then want to overeat on the weekend. So in essence, yes, you can do that. And you have to be the type of person that I can trust to be able to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because yes, it does work that way. But what you'll see is if you have, like, say, banked up a few calories to use on the weekend, your scale weight will usually be a bit higher just from fluid retention, which is fine. It will level out throughout the week. But yes, you can do that. And speaking of, when we are like reverse dieting you and putting into a state of maintenance, you will see the scale weight creep up a little bit, because for every 1 gram of fluid you hold, your body retains 4 grams of water. And obviously, like when you're bringing your food up, you've got more food volume in your tummy as well. So the number on the scales is not a true reflection of what's actually going on in your body. And what we'll usually see is the scales will creep up, then they'll level out, creep up, and then level out based on your activity levels, how much you're moving. But don't panic if we bring your food up and the scales go up. It's pretty normal. Or if you save like a couple of carbs from one day to use another, your scale weight will just be higher, but it's nothing to panic about.